Hi there, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazine. We have a brand new debut video for you today. And this is really cool because as painters develop over time, sometimes they change their technique, they learn new things. Well, Bill Davidson has been painting for a long, long time, but he has developed a brand new way that he now does all of his paintings. So even if you've studied under him in the past, you might not have learned this. This is called Landscapes Reinvented. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Bill Davidson, and welcome to my workshop. And this is going to be an exciting workshop because I'm going to give you some steps for a faster road to success and a more exciting journey along the way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to help you see many different ways of being creative in the process of working on the foundations of a painting. I have some new and innovative techniques that I find very helpful and that I think would have saved me half the time of learning if I'd been able to have had these techniques when I first started. Now, I also have tested many of these techniques on the workshops and found out that they're helpful to other people, and based upon the response, it's been absolutely great from what I've seen in saving people time and growing and enjoying it more. So the number one thing that happens is that when you talk to people, they get disappointed, they don't understand everything simply, and they also don't have a spirit of optimism because they're struggling in their workshops. And so we've all been there. I've been there, we've all been there where we get frustrated. So by doing these techniques that I'm talking about, you'll be able to learn better habits, and at the same time, you'll have a much better time while you're painting because you're going to be able to be creative when you're in the middle of these type problems that you run into. So as we go through it, I want you to I'm going to talk to you, and what we're going to do, we're going to be talking about this painting. We're actually going to paint this painting, and I'm going to want you to paint along with me because it'll be a lot of fun. It's a fun painting, and I'm going to be able to show to you all kinds of steps that'll make it easy to paint. While I'm doing this one, I'll be able to talk to you about starting with the very basics. Starting with how you come up with your concept. I'll explain each term very simply and very slowly. And then we'll go through the process kind of like eating a very good dinner at just a nice slow pace so that you understand everything. You can paint along with me and at the same time be learning new concepts and new habits. One of the unique things about this workshop is I'm going to show you where I think you could be more creative when you're going through and learning these foundations and how you get to practice that creativity and by using your imagination in the middle of learning the foundations. Some of these foundations are going to be easy to pick up on, and I think you'll be able to feel better about yourself when you go through it. All right, welcome back. We're going to talk about designing this painting, and we're going to talk about a little bit about how to really jump in and design any type of painting and how to make it fairly easy and how to deal with these three values, a medium, a light, and a dark, to construct your painting. So this is the first thing we're going to talk about is some generics. Now, a lot of people will tell you this, and that is you want to get a little bit of paint on the canvas before you get rolling. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to stay away from color, and I'm just going to do a tonal block in with the black and white. And you'll go, why is that? So the answer to that is this. The simple solution is if color is so relative and each time you put a color on it changes, if I do a tonal with a color, then I'm going to always be operating with my color not being neutralized so I can see it clean. So the only thing that's going to work is going to be a black grayed off tonal. And that's why we do it that way. I used to do the warm tonals before chromatic black came out. And now that I have the chromatic black, I find that it's easier to mix all my other colors and to put them on. And so why are we breaking it down? Because if you started like I did later on in life, I don't have the experience or the intuitive power to go in and mix and do all these things at one time. You may go, well, I can't do that. Well, whatever you need to do to make it work for you, okay? But one of the things is, if I take it out, my paintings are always better when I'm completed than if I try to do it all at one time. Every now and then I'll go crazy and do it, but if I sink back into my habits and I build good habits, everything gets better, everything gets more successful. One thing that I've learned is that even when I have any type of new canvas or linen I'm getting ready to start, what I'll do is I'll throw some Gamsol on it. It kind of helps set it up a little bit better so that when I start, everything tends to flow a little better. So try that and see if that helps if you're having a problem with your canvas. Now, you don't have to get rid of all these other ones that are real slick or double oil up or triple lead primed or whatever. You can put like white titanium, just paint over them, and you should be able to be ready to go because it'll dry up as already a painted surface. Now, once I'm going, what I want to do is talk a little bit about how easy design could be. Now, there's all these books, and there's all these big theories, and they're somewhat complex. But what happens is, it's not as complex as you really think it is. So let's take the easiest design in the world and start to play with it. So what happens is, one of the things, we know that there's 4 spots where the painting should actually, a focal area, may want to go. And they're about in here. So it's very easy to see. And what happens is, and as I mentioned in that handbook, the most common composition, because we're English and we read left to right, is to have some entryway down in here, go into the painting, maybe go here, come up, and that is the most common focal area and considered to be probably one of the best. But you don't want to do that all the time, obviously, and not every scene's going to set up. Now, if that's my focal area right there, I want what they call tension. So I want some interest over here so that there's some tension to the painting. Now, the other thing that I want to do is I want to be able to move you around the painting. So by using colors and edges and things, I can move you into the painting, then go up to a focal area, and then I have some tension here, and I may move you over here and back in. So it's very important that you just set it up that way. Now, how do you determine where these spots are? They're right about there. It's fairly easy. Now, for people that want to draw the lines, I like to draw them in thirds because if you did, you can always make triangles. So see, watch this. If I'm outside and I got a complex scene, what I can do is, if I start drawing in like this, that determines my halfway point there, my halfway point there. And then what I'll do is, I can draw this line here. And you see what that did? That hit one of them. And I can draw this line here. And that's going to hit like right over in here. Okay? When I start to put these other, all I have to do is keep drawing angular lines. And basically I'll get to every one of these spots. They'll all be at an intersection somewhere. Most of the time you won't need that. But what I'm doing is, I like to kind of split it out in thirds if I need to, so I know where they are. And then here's the thing, you don't really want to leave all those lines, but what you want to be able to do is, right at the edge of your canvas, before you start painting, mark these off. Now you can use a half, whatever is easiest for you, but you want to be able to see something like that so you know you're not getting too far off. Now, obviously, if you're a pro, you don't need any of this. You know exactly what to do. But just so everybody knows, you can simply get to these things by those intersecting triangles. The other thing is this. The simplest way to remember this is also, why don't I do this? Why don't I take out my center, this is what I find the simplest way, where I know not to go, and I take out my edges, anywhere close to the edge, I do not want your attention. So all I have to do is go like this. I can think about it in the negative this way and go, just don't let it get where the dark is right now. I don't want it on these edges, and I do not want it in that center area. So if I can have a focal area up in here somewhere, probably over here, and over here. I'm probably not going to put it right above those centers either. But that's one of the easiest ways to play with it so that you remember it. And I find that that's very useful for beginners. Now what happens is, once I know how I'm going to set this up, I'm going to pick my focal area, and then I'm going to start designing my other areas into it. So it's real easy to do. Now we've all seen the people who can actually start in the middle of the painting and just paint all the way around it. And remember, those things that you use, like a lot of times people do those, I always forget what they're called, where they have the little designs and they do them and they do their little notans, and that's a good thing to do before you start a composition. Switch it one way, switch it this way, draw them all out. Now, people do that a lot. I like to do it on my board, and so if I don't like my design, I'll redesign it. It's not a bad idea if you want to sit down with your sketch pad and do out 3 or 4 designs before you get started. Everything is helpful at this stage. You don't have to be perfect at this stage. This is a more loose, generic, get it in there. Now watercolorists, you see, pencils, they're so good at their drawing and stuff, they can get in there and lay that in and have it really nice looking. But for most beginners, and it's in that composition book I was talking about, that if you get a brush out, it's easier, especially a bigger brush, you don't want to get too tight at this point. So I can really lay out my design. Now, one of the things that I found that was very interesting was laying out space. One of the things, so if I know I've got to have a 60, my percentages of my 3 values, and I'm going to lay every painting out in these 3 values, and it's very important. So what I'm going to do is, if you put them in where they're direct 90-degree angles, you'll see how to space. So let's say my perfect design, obviously, is something like this. I'm going to go back and put these little marks here so you can see them. They'll be fairly close. Remember, I don't have to be perfect here because I'm at the design level. So what happens is this. If I go and I'm going to lay in my design, I know that's half of it. I got to have at least one value that's that big, all the way over there. And then my other value, this, I got this left. So I'll cut it down like this and make sure this is at least not equal and 60% greater that way so that it works out this way. So you see these different sizes? That's the perfect abstract amount of the relative value that you're going to need. And as I showed you in my designs, how that always seems to work out if I'm starting this way. So if I go, well, let's see, let's make a more interesting shape so that it's not laid out that way. So let's say I want to do some type of painting. If I come in and I start breaking up my big shapes and I go, well, here's my ground plane down here, and I start something like that. Now, so most of my painting at a certain value is going to be, let's say here, that and that are 2 equal. So I have to go up higher. That's what I have to do. I got to make this space bigger, and then that's way bigger than that space. It's not equal, and it's not 55%. It's just a bigger space. So it works out way better this way. That's how you always get the good design. Now let's say also, if I'm going to come in and design something, and I go, well, let's make, if I use direct 90-degree angles, I can watch exactly how my layout's going to be. So let's say I was coming in here and I was doing something like this. And I go, okay, I'm coming in and I'm going to know this is going to be my biggest space. So let's say I also come, watch all your spacing. That's different from, let's say I go to here. Now, that are the same size. So you see that's not going to work. So I've got to either go all the way to here, make that smaller. These are still pretty much, so I may have to change this line. So you see what's going on. This is why this can get really strange for you. So let's come over here and go one space here. I'm going to come to here and make my bigger space here and make this one thin over here. So by just changing that, now I've got the right proportions up top. Now remember, we're only talking about the big shape, so why am I spending so much time on that? It's for this reason. I want to be able, this will even look better if I go to here. I'm going to change it to there. And so my spacing gets different. So here's a big space over here, and then let's say I want to make this my smaller space. So I do something like that. So you see, every time you design, you have to pay attention to these lines. Now, if you put it in like this, it'll really, really help you to see how your spacing is going to work. So let's go to one where we're absolutely going to have to lay out a landscape, but we want to do it so that we can simply see what's going on. So now I'm going to get into something. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay in, the easiest way to do this is to go, well, what do I think is going to be my biggest value shape? Because once you lay that in, I'll say this painting here, it's mostly in a medium. So all I have to do, now, why does this work? It works because it's easier to work off one big value. If you establish your bigger shapes first, your bigger values first, then it gets real easy to do. Now I'm doing this without color because it's hard to see. For most people, you could do a color wash and do it that way. Just remember, once you get that color wash going, that part of that color is going to affect your other color. Now pros are real good at dealing with that because they know what they're looking for and where it's headed. But if you're somebody who's a beginner or an intermediate, I find that this method works way better because you're not having to think about color at the same time. Now, sure, I'll go out there and start with a wash sometimes, but if I'm going to do a complicated painting, I want to start like this, and I want to be able to lay out my design real cleanly. So you go, wow, this is like, the key is this can get creative and get quite fun. And the more you do this, the easier it's going to get for you to see what's really going on in your painting. So let's say I've got this and I use my paper towel or whatever. And I go, okay, this painting's going to be a mid-tone, something like that. And that's most of my, so if it's going to be a darker painting, where most of the value's in dark, I'll put in the dark. If it's going to be lighter, I'll go with a little lighter wash in. Now the reason that you do this is, put your big shape in first. That's the simplest thing to do. And then you can carve out what you need to. Let's say we were doing something here where I had a little bit of a sky, and my sky was kind of light, and I only wanted a little. So most people will come up, you can do this. Then you can just wipe out your sky. It's real easy. Now that shape's not interesting, but it's given me my right proportions. And then let's say I had a dark. My dark, I can't go that light here. So I could come in and start to lay out some of my darks. And as long as I lay out, now I have to decide what's more important, what's my bigger shape, light or the dark, okay? So that light's that big, I could make my dark something like this. So if I start to put it in like that, I can see real cleanly how this whole thing's going to start to lay out. This is a perfect abstract type design. If I do it in 90-degree angles, I start to see my shapes real clean. I could have done that by line only. I could have come in and gone like this. And the point is this. This is my big shape, my next shape, and my next shape. Once again, a repetitive process. So I'm not changing up anything yet, and I haven't got into the hard part where I have to change these shapes. So when I talk about shapes, let's say we go, that's a very boring shape. So the next question becomes, any line that's horizontal, any line that's straight vertical, usually are no-nos in a landscape unless you're talking about the direct horizon. So what you do is, you come in and you start playing with this shape. And you start going, oh. Now I start to make it way more interesting. And the more I do of things like this line, I'll start looking at it and go, this line here is too straight. The more you start learning how to do these shapes where they're interesting. Now it's very easy to get them, you can go like this and go, you'll get that line and that line the same, or that line and that line. So you start learning, that's what makes a bad shape, or that's what makes something that's not interesting. So the more I'm able to do things like this, the better everything gets. If this is not an interesting shape, what I'll do is, I'll come in and start to break it up so that you have a little bit of variety there, and maybe move this side up to here. Same thing. Okay, so you start to see that it's a little bit different. So if I bring this line down here, okay, and then just play with this line a little bit more, and I start to make that shape a little more interesting up there. This is a simplified version of what every painting should look like once it starts getting designed. And if you don't believe me, go look at the masters and start looking at how they divided these things up. So this is the real key. This is its simplest form again, and this is how you start playing with and changing shapes. Then it can get more intricate, you see. You can start cutting in here. But until you do the big stuff first, you're going to struggle all the time because you're going to be looking at all the detail. Now let's go. We'll take this very simplified type design, and you can see how I'm starting to change shapes. So you go, why is this that important? Here's why. When you look at a really qualified painter, all their shapes are incredibly interesting in a painting, or at least most of them, and especially the big shapes, and that's what does it for you. So it makes for really interesting design, and this is what makes for interesting shapes. But if you put them in as a block in first and then start playing with them and changing them up, it's much easier to do than if you try to get them interesting right off the bat. So let's stay with my medium, and now we'll start going into something where we're starting to deal with the real subject matter that we have at hand. If I can simplify all my paintings to 3 values and make 3 big interesting shapes that kind of connect, I'm in great shape on my design, as long as I have a path in and some way to move you around the painting, and I hit some type of focal area in one of those 4 perfect spots. Now remember, as we go, you see, it gets more complicated. So let's say, here's my painting. Now you're going to go, oh, wow. It can't be that simple. It actually is. And if you're, look, you won't get to all this when you're out there plein air painting for a while. But if you're inside your studio and you start playing with shapes and learning these things, life gets really fun and interesting. And this is how you get creative. You take the canvas and you go, how interesting can I make this painting? And you play with these designs before you start jumping into all that color. I think may be easier for you, unless you're just good at throwing a wash in. But I still want you to be able to pay attention to the 3 big shapes. Here's why. This painting is kind of a scene that was a big scene, and I broke it down. Now watch what happens. Remember, I took the black and white, is what I did, and I laid it out of what the scene really looks like, you see. So I know how my design came into play. So the first thing I would have done would have been start with a big gray, because I know if I look out there, most of it's going to be in mid-tone. Okay? And then I know if I was to design this the way that they recommend, I would do something like this. I'd go, all right, there's a big white spot right here, okay? Then I would go, okay, I got another one here. Now, what I'm doing is I'm easily going in, and let's say I just did it from something like this. And I use 90-degree angles to kind of figure out where I'm headed. I can start to go like this and start to see what my painting is going to look like. There's basically my lit space. Then, if I do my dark, see, I can come in and go, well, my dark kind of runs like this. And I can start going, okay. And what I'm checking to see is, these are those trees that are back here. And I don't have to be perfect, but what I'm again doing is I'm starting to lay out my design. So my medium in this painting that we're doing is the biggest value by far. Then my next is my light, and then my dark. And so just by checking this, I'm starting to see what's going on. Now what I'm going to do is I'm also seeing how to connect my darks. And I can always play with this later, but I'm just seeing what is my real setup. So if I'm designing, I can start to look at things like this and go, okay, my light needs to be a little bit bigger. Midtone, light, dark. Okay? So that's all I'm doing is seeing how that's going to line up. So if I do my designs that way, I start to see what's really going on in the painting. So it becomes pretty easy to start designing at this point. So now, once I do those shapes like that, let's start to come in, and I've got an idea. This is going to make a really nice abstract design. This is what it feels like. I know that all my three value ratios are right, and I know kind of where I'm going to head. So let's come back in now and go, let's play with the shapes a little bit. Now, one of these things, see how easy it is to move this paint around. You have to practice playing with your paints. I use the towels. It's easier for me. Other people use different things. One lady used a makeup remover to pull her lights out. It's easier to pull your lights out than it is to do anything else. So now, see if this is an exercise in creativity, what I'm doing right now is I'm learning how to do my shapes. And I'm learning what interesting shapes. So now I've taken it to another level. I'm starting to change it so that I can see how an interesting shape looks. So as I start to do this, you'll see now I'm going to throw in all kinds of angles and things like that help the painting out. So if I'm designing, and these are the type of things that what you're going to want to do when you're learning. I'm not saying that this is how it's going to always set up or that this is easy, but I'm trying to figure out what makes it easier. So this could have moved over a little bit more. This starts to have a little bit of, I'm playing with my shapes and I'm starting to change out every shape. And it's a soft touch. You get in there and you start to soft touch things. Okay, and I know these are trees. So I can now start to play with the design a little bit more, and I start to get a better idea of what shapes, how much better I can, and don't be afraid to use the finger, okay, because it's really helpful, how much better I can do when I start doing these things. And so it's one of these things where I can go, okay, how do I make a little more interesting shape with each shape? Now this is just an exercise. We're going to go in and design this painting. After this, I'm just showing you how you start learning shapes better. How you start getting creative, how you go, well, what if I change the shape there? What if I move that up and I change this? Just because there's no color involved, you're focusing on nothing but the shapes. And that's how you learn to see shapes and how you learn to design better. And as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm making sure all my dark is connected. And that's how I'm going to come in and build it, by doing it that way. Now, as I go, you see, I start to learn how all these shapes are really going to pan out and how I can change a shape to make it more interesting. And this is where it gets exciting. You start to learn. You can take each individual shape and do it this way. That shape there is too solid. This shape's too squared off. This shape's not at an angle. So the more I play with these, you can see how I get on the edge. I don't have to change the whole shape. You just get on the edge of the shape, and that's what's going to make all the difference in the world. So you see, as I start to do it, I can tell. Now, in the painting, I already know, because I've already laid out the painting, why these shapes are interesting. Now you'll go, well, I don't want to look into a painting that much. This is what people are seeing, so it's kind of important to learn this part. So I can make that. I'm just making that an interesting shape. So anytime I make a straight line, I can break it with a finger. And if you start to see how this works when you're dealing with the black and white, you'll start to go, well, that's what an abstract design really looks like. Okay? And so then you'll start to see, and the more perfect you get those values, and the more interesting those shapes, the better off you're going to be when you start a painting. Now, this was just an example to show you that this is what this painting really looks like underneath. This is the abstract design, and this is the foundation of the painting. And this is kind of why the painting may work. One of the things that I noticed was when I mixed the red evergreen tree, I'd only mix shade for green trees. So a lot of times what's going to happen is the shade for the red tree, if the tree's a nice warm yellow red, could come in and be a redder type shade than the green. So I'm just going to mix up some of it. I use my value again first and come in here and start to get this redder shade so that I have a little different shade for this red tree right here. Now, everybody is good at something. So what happens is I was pretty good at seeing color. I wasn't great at values or shapes, which is the foundation. So I could see it. The hard part was mixing it way in the back in the mid-mountains. I always said that was very, very difficult. Once I seized on the idea that intensity is the issue in color most of the time, then I was able to figure it out. Now we're going to talk about muddy paintings also. So pros know how to overcome mud, so they can move around with the paint all the time and just keep putting a layer of fresh paint on top. The problem is when you're a latecomer, what happens is you just keep playing in it and you're picking up stuff down below, and the next thing you know, you got what people call a muddy painting. It's caused by taking the colors and just putting them on here and just keep rubbing them all the time till they just work into a bad, what they call a muddy painting. But the really bad thing, if the temperature is not right, that's when the painting will look muddy. So you can take a color, let's say this color, this red, and you put it behind one of the red trees, it looks fine. It's in shade. But if I was to put that in another spot, like in the green shade right here, it's probably going to look muddy because it's too warm next to that green. So there's a good chance that's going to look like, or I go in with this temperature, it's a little bit like that. More than likely, that's going to look muddy because it's the wrong temperature in the wrong spot. So that's the other thing that creates a muddy painting. And like I like to thank everybody, that was Richard Schmid. He was the first one that really defined that terminology, that it's the wrong temperature in the wrong spot. The same thing can happen if you do this. You just keep rubbing it till you get these god-awful grays that just look like they're kind of warm, they're kind of cool, but they just don't belong anywhere. They're not a clean temperature shift. Now, as we get ready to start, see, I want to be able to go right after my focal area. Now, I always say most pros use 3 passes. So the first pass, this first was what you call your tonal block-in. It's done in almost a watercolor type viscosity. My next viscosity will be a little more like olive oil, okay? So, and when I put it on, I'm going to put it on light. And what I mean by that is I'm going to put it on kind of thin, and I'm going to put it on so that I know I can see how these colors are reacting before I totally commit. So I'm going to go right for the easiest color. Now, this is a touchy-feely thing. The amount of Gamsol you put on here affects everything about your viscosity. So if I get it too thick too soon and it's the wrong color, I'm going to fight it my whole time. But if I put it on with a nice soft touch and a little bit of viscosity, it's more like an olive oil, I'll start to see how it's going to look. Now remember, the first color on there doesn't have the other color around it, so it's really kind of irrelevant till you start to see how it looks next to another color. Now, everybody has a reason for wanting to paint. Mine is I love oil paint. I love the textures. I love how I can create texture, how I can create temperature shifts, and I just love the feel of the oil paint. So everything about it is what makes me want to paint. If I have to paint the whole painting with some type of real thin painting, and I don't ever get into the thickness or the beautiful brush strokes, what it does for me is it takes away all the fun. Now, as I get in, you see how that's really green, but see how it's flat and has no interest? When I put a touch of this blue on, you'll see the sky start to sit on there. Now, that becomes incredibly interesting. And so what I want to do is, I don't want to cover up everything else. As I get down here, this shadow gets farther away and it's smaller out here. So what's going to happen is there's more blue in the sky. So remember, that shadow is gonna, and you've got to have those temperature fluctuations. It really helps. So if I go back up into my green here, I think I want to get a little bit lighter in value and run another shift on here. That's a little bit warm, because I've got to relate those two. I've got to get some more viridian going. And I want to get a little cooler shift. That's a little too dark. So don't get lazy on your color. That's already better. Now, I want to get a little more intense. And you want to test it right up next to the shade. Now this is what I call one of those fun paintings. It's not like a huge mountain painting that just has all kinds of real things going on in it, where you have all these technical things you have to deal with. I want to lighten it up just a little bit more up there. Now, this is the one thing that you're going to pay attention to. As you go, you're going to want to really, you got to look at the feel and go, how's it looking? Is it looking interesting? Is that what I want? Now, a lot of times, I may be too dark down here where this little piece sticks out. And this, see how strong this edge is right here? So what I'm going to do is, every edge gets soft and hard and lost and found. So I've got that part in there. Now I know this, that as I go around the painting, if I get this close to right, and I start to move around the painting, I can start to get an idea of what's right and what's not right. So let's go to this tree. Right next to that, I'm going to get, it's a little bit intense. Oh, here it is. That's why. I'm going to add it, get it a little bit grayed off more. And just a hair lighter in value. But see how easy this is to do? Once you're into this, now some people, it depends upon a lot. There's people that are scared of a big brush, and that's okay. You need to do what makes you happy. For me, the bigger brush keeps me from fussing too much. So I start to lay that in, then let's go to the dark side. Here's my shade. I'm going to get it a little bit darker. As long as I keep the red, I'm okay. Now you do need to be a little bit careful if you are one of these people that overdo everything. In other words, if you're one of these people that put too much black in or too much gray in, you'll have to adjust it. But that's true of any complement also. So if you're complementary. Now, I like to move it around a little bit once I get it on here, and I want to eventually get some really nice strokes. When you're dealing with a tree, make sure you bring some of the shade over so that you don't have all light on one side. Okay? And then I'm not going to worry too much about edges right now. I'm just coming in and starting to see how everything's going to line up. Let's go get my dark accent. I got a nice warm one over here, and I'm going to slide, oops, that could get a little bit warmer. I can see that immediately. So you want these temperature shifts, some of this warm up in here with this green. And remember, one of the nice things about your brushwork is this. If you go too far horizontal when you're dealing with the shadow, it'll start to look like it's got light in there. So try to keep these things as close to a downstroke as you can, and you'll be able to see the difference. Same thing, I got to get some dark. I can't just have that straight line in there because I have to have a good shape. Okay? Real easy as we start to go. Now let's put some of my shade from that tree. I'm getting a green that goes outside that warm. And some of it sits back up in there too. And usually that green covers all the way around that brown. And again, the brown is the spot where the blue sky can't get to it because it's got greenery around it so much that blue sky cannot get into it. The more color in the right value you can get into here, the better off you're going to be. And I always talk about separation because I want you to see this clearly. I have to separate this tree by value from that back area, which is the rooftop. If I don't get it separated by value or some type of color temperature shift, it's not going to work very well. Now look at how it starts to separate. And what you'll do is you'll look right in here and you'll go, if it's dark, I either have to darken something or lighten. But so far my values are pretty close. Let's go back now and start to put the light on the tree. I'm starting to put some of it on. And vary your strokes, play with them, loosen some edges. This is all soft stuff. Okay, I've started on this tree and I'm starting to get where I need to go. Now, as I keep going, the next thing I'm going to want to do, I know that my blue back here, that's the mountain behind, is going to have to sit in there so I can put those trees in front of it. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take a different brush because that one has too much warm color in it. And I'm going to come in and go, all right, let's get this. And let's get this really thin, really an olive oil type touch. Okay? Now if you've ever painted with somebody like my buddy Michael Lynch, or you see like Anton paint at their initial run-ins, it's Bill Anton, at their initial run-in, you'll see that they're very, very thin. And so, because if you get too thick, everybody knows this, you get too thick too soon, you're going to get in trouble. Now, whatever way works for you, that you like, that's fun, is what's going to help you paint, because you're going to want to repeat it. Remember, real soft touch. Here's the funny thing about people. It's almost like taking a feather and coming up to your painting and letting the paint on the end of the brush do the work. And what most of us do is this. When it's not working, we push harder, and that is of no use. Remember, this is a nice, playful, soft, olive oil type touch that I'm using to get this going. I touched something that has a little yellow in it. So I'm just going to put it on a little bit thicker. Okay? So then I'm going to put the next set of trees as I get ready to go. So that was these right here. Now, this color here, all I have to do is check that value. And I can check it this way. You see the dark here, this tree here has to be lighter in value than the dark of that other tree coming up. So I would say I want to lighten it just a hair. Yep, that's a little better. I see my separation really clean. Now remember, these shapes have to be really interesting. So this is where you get to go, well, I know how to deal with shapes. I got this down. So the more you get into it, the easier it gets for you, because the key is this, and I'll thank Mr. Schmid for this again, is the more I get right on the painting, the easier it is to finish. Right next, so I want to see this yellow in this frontal tree. I'm going to get a little bit, oops, ooh. I got way too intense there. I'm going to get a little bit darker here. Now, you may think, well, these values are so touchy because they're so close. And so the key is make sure that what you're doing, you're on the right value. And it's starting to sit in there nicely now. And watch how I try to connect at least some of these darks. But this line, this tree line, is where a value separates. So you don't have to get all worried about all your values back in here and that line back up underneath these bushes and things, as you do whenever one of your big shapes happens. So for me, it's really kind of neat to go, wow, if I could just come in, and this is all dark, if I can just come in and get these values right, and I get that tree line interesting, I'm in great shape to finish this painting. Hi, I'm Bill Davidson and welcome to this video. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to cover an awful lot and really try to simplify the processes for you and really break into one innovative process dealing with how to really mix your colors easier, how to get your values nailed in your color, and also how to get recession in your color. One of the things that I found is that this is the best way, this new process where I deal with grays and how it deals with color, because it also creates a color harmony. In addition, we'll cover shapes, design, underwater rocks, top of the water rocks, reflections. There's a lot in here that we'll go through, and it'll be a lot of fun, but there'll also be all kinds of little tidbits about how to really see, how to really build your shapes, but really more importantly, how to get those perfect color harmonies, how to nail those values with your color, and how to easily mix colors that were very hard to mix and have been as I watched my students. So I hope you'll join us. It should be a lot of fun, but it's going to be packed with a lot of knowledge. So come on in.
Well, that is Landscapes Reinvented with Bill Davidson, and you can learn more about that brand new video. You can watch the whole thing at home. Just go to painttube.tv and put in the discount code that we have for you up in the comments section. Now, let's get right to our interview with Bill Davidson. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazine. Today, our guest is the great Bill Davidson. Bill, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I'm looking forward to spending some time getting to know you again. Now, you and I have done this before, and but you know, you're a guy who is constantly, how could I say this, morphing or changing. You're never the same guy 2 years later.
I hope so.
Yeah, how do you get that mindset? Because I think that's important.
Well, I think one of the things is, if you want to keep, like for me, it's how do I keep the journey exciting and how do I keep it kind of both pleasure and both meaningful so that they come together. And I think one of the ways to do that is you have to keep morphing. I think boredom is one of the things that just scares me, and I don't want to get stuck in a rut somehow. So I think it's real easy, and one of the things that I've learned about getting creativity is this is fun. Whenever you come up with your first answer solution, just block it off and say you can't go that way. And so that start moving toward, you're going to have to find another avenue.
Yeah, so I went to a class one time, and the guy said, he said, come up with 75 or 100 solutions. And you're like, no. And he said, no, you got 10 minutes. Here's your problem. Come up with 75 or 100, and don't judge anything. Just get it all on a piece of paper. And then, you know, they ring the bell and we have to stop. He said, now take the first 20 and X them out, because those are the things you're always going to default to. And he said, then look at the depth and evaluate what's there, and you realize, you know, there's so much more there that, you know, you really take the time to think.
Yeah, I think that's one of the keys, and I think that's the same thing like with what they say, how do you keep a positive attitude or something. You know, if you get in a negative type Tetris effect where you start getting those negative thoughts and then they start getting worse and so the more you can keep those positive thoughts running, you can get that positive Tetris effect and you build a momentum, don't you think?
I think. So you said something about not wanting to get into a rut. You lived a life in a rut. And I don't mean to say that in a derogatory sense, but you like to say you're a recovering trial lawyer.
Correct.
You had a big business, you're running a lot of employees, doing a lot of trials, and all of a sudden, everything changed. Tell me about the moment everything changed.
Well, I think what happened is, for me, at first, you know, you're building up these, I spent 25 years in the law, 25 years. and you're building this, and at first it's kind of meaningful and exciting. It's a little bit like, when you first start painting, it's very exciting. You don't worry, you never get bored. It was the same thing in the law. And then eventually, after a while, it got to be more about money than the meaningful part of life. And so I decided, well, I need more meaning is what I needed, because it became a big business, and every decision, I know this to be true, it's not either 100% business or 100% meaning, but it had shifted where more of it was business and money than meaning, and I needed to shift it back and kick it over 50% where I get more meaning out of life.
So what happened then? How did you decide to find meaning?
Well, I said, well, I'll start looking around, and it's odd because these things happen right about in your midlife crisis too. That could kind of throw a ringer.
Go out and buy a Porsche?
See, I thought, I'm either going to be driving a motorcycle or a Porsche with gold chains hanging around my neck, or I'm going to find some other type of meaning where I can help people in another way. And I guess, so I started doing local art lessons, and I went, this is kind of fun. This is more meaningful. And I didn't realize at that time that psychologically I was getting into what they call a state of flow, which also is hugely beneficial to your health and your mental state of mind. But I had no idea I was doing that. And at first when I started painting, I was really not very good at all. And I get this question all the time. What, did you paint when you were a kid? Did you draw? I did nothing. I was a guy. I was playing sports, and I was told, you better figure out a way to earn a living, and that's it. That's what you do, especially a man in our generation. It was, you better get out there and earn a living. And, that's it. So you do it. And then I think when you get older and you got a little bit of finances that you can work with, you start to go, what do I really want to do? Where can I really get more meaning in my life? And I think the ultimate goal is, how can I help other people too?
Do you remember that moment when you decided to take an art lesson? Was there something that stimulated that?
I'll tell you what stimulated it. And they say this about buying art. I was traveling a pretty good bit for my job, and then I'd take vacations, and we'd always walk into the galleries. And the galleries, I'd go, wow, that's beautiful stuff. And I love the outdoors. And I really think if I had been born in the West, I may have been a painter earlier. But on the East Coast, especially the Southeast, there really wasn't, that was not going on. Even when I started learning 16, 17, 18 years ago, there was no plein air workshop anywhere in the southeastern part of the United States.
There were none anywhere. I mean, when we started Plein Air Magazine, which was 15, 16, 17 years ago, probably, there was nothing. There were no plein air events. There were no workshops. It was a desert. I mean, there were maybe a couple.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. And I even for the longest time, the Southeast had none. I mean, I started taking lessons from this guy in the neighborhood, and I said, look, I went to a plein air workshop. I'm going to take you out. We're going to plein air paint. I took him out one time. He said, I'll never do that again.
Yeah.
But to be out there, and you've been, we just got back from Yosemite in November, and we were up there. The waterfalls were running, trees were yellow, and to stand out there for a solid week and paint, it's a great experience.
It's the best. It's the best. So talk to me about this plein air lifestyle, because I think that, to the point of this painter who went out one time and then went back to the studio, it's not for everybody, but what is it about it?
Well, I think, one, if you like the outdoors, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you like fly fishing or anything like that that's related to the outdoors, like I used to be able to fly fish some. And then when I started painting, I take my fly fishing stuff and then my painting gear. And so I'd fly fish for a little while in a stream, And then I'd go, okay, I think I'm going to paint. Well, I'd set my easel up in the stream and paint all these streams and everything. And I went, what's more engaging? Painting was more engaging than fly fishing for me. And I went, this is where it's got to go. And then I learned that, you know, because I'd been a lawyer, it was easy for me to break down and do research and take complicated matters and simplify them. I said, I can communicate somewhat decently. I said, I ought to be able to teach this once I get the hang of how to do it. And that's when I went to the first workshop. And the guy was a Russian guy. And yeah, I mean, he didn't talk a lot. When he did, it was pretty abrupt. and he was not communicative at all. And most of the workshops I went to at first, the teacher would paint, but they wouldn't explain anything about what they were doing. And so I thought, if I can figure out the processes, I can explain it. And I can communicate it where people can actually understand it, because it was really hard to learn if you're watching and you have no idea why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, you know, this whole business is built on that principle, because I experienced the same thing. And it was not, you know, there are a lot of good painters who can't teach, and there are a lot of good teachers who can't paint. But finding one who can teach and paint, which you've done so beautifully, where you can explain complex principles and break them down and make them simplified, that makes such a huge difference.
And I think it does. And I think it's kind of it's a fun art form to really, like, even during COVID, I bet I looked through another 100 art books, probably watched another 20 videos, and I started distilling out what I thought would work, that would simplify. It's funny. You think it can't get any simpler, and then you can find something that makes it simpler. And you go, wow, that's a game changer. And that becomes exciting.
So let's talk about simplification, because somebody watching this might not even understand what that means from a painting perspective. If you were to kind of just break it down for somebody who is novice, maybe even somebody experienced, and just say, here's how I look at painting, and here's how I kind of try to simplify. Now, I know you have a lot of different video instruction out that we've done together in workshops and a lot of other things. It's not something you can do in 10 seconds, but break it down.
I think if the easiest way to explain it is this. At first, most people are drawn to painting for color. They can't draw. They don't really have much sense of design, and they don't have any idea that its shapes are really that important in the painting. And I think so. And one artist told me this. I mean, just kind of briefly, it was Ned Mueller, and he goes, "Look, Bill, if you could do value studies, which is just black and white, just gray, you'd get ahead of everybody if you could do those for 2 years." Well, most of us joined for color. I mean, we love color, and that's what we want to see. So I was like, well, I really don't want to do that for 2 years. I'll quit. So that's what it was. And I went, well, let's try it this way. Let's do tonals and work on shapes and just take color out for a while. But I could still do it in the same painting, and I could add color back in once I, as you say, chunk it down to where you're just working in a tonal that's just grays. It's kind of like the old black and white TV.
Yeah.
Nothing reads well unless those shapes and values and design are right. So I mean, when people look at a painting, they see the color and everything's all intermingled. They've got no idea there's a structure, an abstract structure and design underneath that.
Well, and what they don't understand is that the minute you add color, you add tremendous amount of complexity to learning.
Well, and that's exactly right. And so one of the processes that's really interesting is you can only think, they say, about one thing at a time. No matter what we all think we can do. We all think we can multitask. We all think we can do 2 to 3 things at a time. Every neuroscience study says it's inefficient and does not work. You focus on one thing at a time is what you do. And one of the cool things is they have a little book out called the Book of Talent. And it's really the book of effort in my mind, or better training. And what it goes on to say is there's certain hard skills and then there's soft skills. So if I have a hard skill they say that's the skill you should always work on the most. Well, in my mind, in art instruction, the hard skills would be design, shape, and value, because you can figure them out. There's a logic to them. You know, if you have 3 shapes of equal size, you need a bigger shape in there, and you need one of them smaller. It's the same thing like putting the couch in your great room. You wouldn't put all these same size chairs in there. But so those are hard skills, and I really think people can figure those out, and they can get logically there. And then they have what they call the soft skills, which I call color. And the reason it's a soft skill is this: every color is relative to what's around it. So you take a yellow and you put a big spot of blue next to it. Now the yellow looks greener, and the blue's been changed also. Mm-hmm. So I call that a soft skill, which means it's always moving on you. It's like a basketball game. So if you're just doing free throws, that's a hard skill. You can work on it. But once the game starts moving, that's a soft skill, because you have to adapt every time something else happens. And I think that's how I get a lot of people in workshops that go, I finally got this design thing. I can do the tonal. I'm there. But when I start putting the color on is when it starts going downhill. So it's a soft skill, and it's so relative.
Yeah. Well, I think that makes perfect sense, because, you know, if you can master those 3 big skills, you can do great paintings even if you don't do color, and then you start adding in the color. Color, you know, I think color is a lifetime of study. It is, to me, it's something that is ever changing, and, you know, I get to a point of maturity and I think I've got it down, and then I see something that Joe Paquette has done, or some other artist, and I go, how did he do that? You know, how did he make that color vibrate? How did he make that harmony? And then I realize I've got so much more to learn.
Yeah, I think it's because it's constantly moving on you. It's not, in other words, you can change this color, which changes that color. So whatever you're doing in there, plus it's also the mixtures. People are always asking, how did you mix that color? Well, in design, you can say, I have a big shape, a middle shape, and a smaller shape, and that's good design. You can't give a recipe for, in other words, if you ask an instructor, they go, how'd you mix that color? Most of the time they'll go, well, I started with this and this. But you're putting in pinpoints of color. And so you can't really get a great recipe.
Right, and the minute you put that pinpoint in, it changes everything around it.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's constantly moving. But it's funny, because I was sitting there and I thought, what is the real problem with color? What throws a color harmony off? And during COVID, you get to think about all these things, and I went, you know what it is? It's the intensity of a color in the wrong place, or it's too intense a color. And I said, that's really, and I think they call that, I guess, design, discordant color. It doesn't fit in with the overall harmony of the color. So once I realized, I said, wow, intensity's the issue. That's usually the big issue that throws a color harmony off.
Well, and when we fall in love with color, we want to do colorful paintings. We love, I mean, you know, I love color. And one of the maturity things that I've realized is to get the sense of bright, brilliant color. You don't do bright, brilliant color. You dull everything down, and you make a couple of spots just sing and vibrate, and it makes the whole thing feel colorful. It reads well. But, you know, when we're starting out, we're looking at a patch of green grass. The sun is blasting that green grass, and it's that vibrant yellow. But when you lay it down, it's like, oh, it's so ugly. You know, so you talk a little bit about how do you deal with
that's
managing that.
That's probably the best question, and I think that ties in, dovetails into the issue where people went, I can get the tonal now, I got the design, but once I put the color on, it's a mess. It starts going downhill. So what I was thinking about when I was sitting there, and it's exactly what you say, If you don't have the grade color around the intense color, then everything's fighting for attention at the same time. And it starts to look garish and horrible. And if you just, so it's real easy to see. So I started playing with grays. And I was going, okay, so let's see how can I solve the issue of color and value, and at the same time, color harmony, and at the same time, color temperature and recession of color when I'm painting a landscape.
What do you mean by recession?
In other words, like, how do I get atmosphere and move the painting farther and farther?
Okay, create the sense of distance.
The sense of depth and distance with color alone, taking out size and shape and everything. Once again, breaking it down. And so I was thinking, well, you know, most people, you can paint with the primary colors, red, yellow, blue, white, and they can call it a simplified palette. You can do that, and it's not that hard. And then other people add a ton of colors. But most people will have a gray somewhere. And so I used to have one gray, and you'll see this on a lot of people's palettes. There'll be one gray. And I thought, well, what if I just mixed up, why don't I get rid of that one gray? And they came up with this black, a transparent black.
Yeah.
So it doesn't knock color down like the real old blacks did, the ivory black and everything. And I thought, well, let's try some of that. So I took white, and I mix up like 5 different value color puddles on my palette. And then I go, now that solves one problem. I can see what yellow value really is because they're right next to each. I can just move it over and look at it and go, I know that's the right value.
So are you saying you mix that black into each of those puddles?
I'd mix the black and the white, mix up big puddles of different values all the way up.
All right, so a string from dark to light.
Yep. And then so you know how people see yellow, they see it as actually lighter than it really is in value.
Right.
They see blue darker than it really is. So that's one of the problems that's moving on you. So this solved that problem because I could see the value puddle, and I can put the color right next to it and go, wow, it looks like it fits. So that solves that problem. And then I went, well, if we need more grade off paintings, why don't I just, and the first question you're always asked in color is, what is the value? That's always the first question first. What value am I looking for? Because the value is what sets it all up. So if I go, what's the value? I look at my gray puddle and go, well, that's the right value. And then I take the color that I'm looking for, blue, red, or yellow, or whatever, and start mixing it into that puddle. And then, so I can mix the right value and then start nailing the color at the same time. And that helps also, all those grays knock the intensity down of the color beautifully so that I don't have too intense a color. So I'm creating a natural harmony now.
Right.
And so that makes a big, big difference. Now, at first, then I went, well, wait a minute. This is too simple. This is way, way too simple because I was getting recession, I was getting color harmony, and I was nailing my values every time. And then those really hard colors, and this is what they are. They're in that midground and they're in that background. So when somebody says mix a green, it's 25 miles back there, that's the hardest color in the world to mix because you're like, it really isn't green anymore.
Right.
It's gray.
Right. Blue-gray, probably blue-gray.
It could be, with a hint, just a hint of green. And so those colors, I could never see, I had trouble with them. And I thought, why are the students having trouble? That's why. They're so hard to mix, especially, so I started doing this with the puddles, and I went, I could mix all those hard colors now in no time. Unbelievably changed my game. So it's just amazing what it did. I went, if I'd have known this 15 years ago, I could have cut my learning time in half. And I could have taught people this. And so I just started teaching it about a year ago, and people were like amazed.
Well, this is a brand new video, Landscapes Reinvented. You got a taste of it. If you're interested in the whole video, you can find it at painttube.tv and use that discount code, which is valid for today only. It's up in the comments section. Thank you for watching. I'm Eric Rhodes.
Hi, I'm Bill Davidson and welcome to this video. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to cover an awful lot and really try to simplify the processes for you and really break into one innovative process dealing with how to really mix your colors easier, how to get your values nailed in your color, and also how to get recession in your color. One of the things that I found is that this is the best way, this new process where I deal with grays and how it deals with color, because it also creates a color harmony. In addition, we'll cover shapes, design, underwater rocks, top of the water rocks, reflections. There's a lot in here that we'll go through, and it'll be a lot of fun, but there'll also be all kinds of little tidbits about how to really see, how to really build your shapes, but really more importantly, how to get those perfect color harmonies, how to nail those values with your color, and how to easily mix colors that were very hard to mix and have been as I watched my students. So I hope you'll join us. It should be a lot of fun, but it's going to be packed with a lot of knowledge. So come on in.